It was a cold morning in early March 1920. In a quiet town of Ohio, the train whistle echoed through the fog, and Clara Emerson stood by her porch, wrapped in her late husband's coat. The war had ended nearly 2 years ago, yet the sound of trains still made her heart ache, because each one once brought letters from France. Letters that stopped coming in the spring of 1918. Her husband, Private William Emerson, had been reported missing in action during the final push near the Meuse-Argonne. She had received the official telegram, short, cold, and final. But in her heart, something never settled. That morning, the postman stopped by her house, an old man who had once served alongside her father in the Spanish-American War. He looked nervous. "Mrs. Emerson, I think this one's been lost in the system a long time." He handed her an envelope, yellowed by time, edges torn, but sealed with the distinct blue military wax. Her hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting. William Emerson, AEF France, 1918. Inside was a single letter. The ink had faded, but the words cut through the years like a whisper from the dead. "My dearest Clara, if this reaches you, it means something has gone wrong. The mission tomorrow isn't in the reports. They've kept it secret, even from the officers. I don't know if I'll return. If I don't, promise me you'll find the truth. They can hide a man's death, but not the reason behind it. William." Her breath froze. She read it again, then again. They can hide a man's death. That night, she lit a candle and pulled out the small wooden box where she had kept all of his old letters. Each was dated neat and filled with love, except one small gap. April 1918, the week he vanished. Something was missing. She decided to travel to Washington, to the War Department, to ask questions no widow was supposed to ask. But before leaving, she noticed something on the back of the envelope she'd missed before. A faint stamp that read, "Returned, unauthorized dispatch," and an unknown set of numbers. D472. She didn't yet know that these numbers would lead her to one of the government's most hidden wartime operations, the Silent Battalion. The morning train to Washington roared like a beast through the misty fields of Pennsylvania. Clara sat by the window, her hands clutching the worn envelope. Each jolt of the carriage felt like a heartbeat, steady, painful, uncertain. Around her, men in dark coats whispered about the coming elections, the price of steel, prohibition. But no one spoke about the war anymore. America was trying to forget. Clara couldn't. She arrived at Union Station just after noon. Washington in 1920 was a city of marble pride and silent ghosts, polished memorials for the living to hide the memory of the dead. Her first stop was the War Department, a place that smelled of tobacco and dust, where clerks with hard eyes and tighter lips stamped endless papers about men who no longer existed. At the counter, a young officer looked at her letter and frowned. "Ma'am, this mission code, D472, isn't in our records. Are you sure it's authentic?" "It's my husband's handwriting," she said firmly. "He wrote it before he died. He mentioned something called a mission that wasn't official." The officer hesitated. Then, lowering his voice, he said, "Wait here." 10 minutes later, he returned, pale. Behind him came an older man in a grey uniform, Colonel Andrew Hollis, head of post-war intelligence. He studied Clara for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Emerson, where did you get this?" she told him. "Every detail. The letter, the date, the return stamp." The colonel's jaw tightened. "That operation," he said slowly, "was erased for a reason. It was never meant to reach anyone, especially not a civilian." Clara didn't move. "With respect, Colonel, my husband died for this country. If you think I'll walk away because it's inconvenient for your paperwork, you're mistaken." The man sighed. "You sound like him." Then he took off his cap and whispered, "D472, the Silent Battalion, was a volunteer mission. 36 men sent behind German lines in April 1918. No official records, no survivors." Clara's voice trembled. "Then how did he write to me after that?" The colonel leaned closer. "That's what we never understood. One report claimed a soldier was found alive weeks later, wounded, delirious, carrying letters with military intelligence. But before he could testify, he vanished from a field hospital in Rams. Vanished, gone, no trace." Clara felt the world blur around her. Could William have survived even briefly after the army declared him dead? The colonel slid a small note across the desk. Fort Benning, Georgia, Archive Room 3. Ask for file Emerson D472, burn after reading. He looked at her once more and said quietly, "Be careful, Mrs. Emerson. Some ghosts aren't meant to be found." That night, in a small boarding house on E Street, Clara spread her husband's letters on the bed, every word, every comma, every date. One page caught her eye. The ink looked heavier, as if he'd pressed too hard. When she held it to the candlelight, faint numbers appeared, written in invisible ink. Benning, 472, coordinates. She froze. It wasn't just a letter. It was a map. Somewhere in Georgia, the truth about the silent battalion and her husband's final days was waiting to be uncovered. As the candle burned low, Clara whispered to the photo on her nightstand, "Hold on, Will, I'm coming." Outside, the city slept, unaware that one woman was about to reopen a chapter of the war the government had buried, and America had chosen to forget. The sun burned over the red clay roads of Georgia as Clara stepped off the train at Fort Benning. The air smelled of pine, gun oil, and secrets. Soldiers moved across the camp like ghosts in khaki, training, shouting, laughing. None of them knew that deep below their feet in a locked archive were the memories of men who were never meant to exist. Clara wore a plain grey dress and carried a small leather bag. She had forged a letter of introduction, an old contact from the War Department, someone who owed her husband a favor. Inside the base, she found Archive Room 3, a narrow corridor lined with cabinets that looked older than the war itself. A middle-aged clerk sat at a desk, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "Name?" he asked. "Mrs. Clara Emerson. I'm here for file D472. I was told to collect it for review." The clerk blinked. "Ma'am, that file doesn't exist." Clara leaned forward, her voice steady. "It does. Colonel Hollis gave me this note." When she placed the paper on the table, the man's expression changed instantly. Without a word, he stood up, turned the sign on the door to closed, and led her down a narrow staircase. At the bottom was a locked iron door. He opened it. Inside lay rows of boxes marked only with numbers. No names, no records, no acknowledgement. Dust filled the air like fine smoke. He handed her a single folder, sealed with black tape. "Whatever you see here, ma'am, you didn't see." Then he left, locking the door behind her. Inside the folder, Clara found dozens of military reports. Mission D472, Silent Battalion. April 1918. Her husband's name appeared on the roster. Private First Class William Emerson. The first pages described a secret operation to destroy a German communication post behind enemy lines. But then the tone changed. The reports became inconsistent, redacted, censored. Several pages were torn. On one surviving note, scrawled in pencil, were the words "Only 3 made it back." Emerson among them. Orders changed. Evacuation cancelled. Silence ordered from above. Her hands shook as she read the final report. Subject: Emerson attempted to deliver field intelligence. Contained unauthorized statements implicating U.S. command in civilian casualties. Detained for questioning. Transferred to Reims Military Hospital. Missing thereafter, she gasped. It wasn't the Germans who silenced William. It was his own army. Then, at the bottom of the folder, a photograph fell out. Grainy, faded, but clear enough to recognize William, standing beside 2 soldiers, holding a letter in his hand. Behind them, a building marked Reims Medical Unit 12, and a date, June 1918, 2 months after he was declared dead. He was alive. Tears filled her eyes. But beneath the photo, she saw something else. Another slip of paper burned at the edges, with a single line written in her husband's handwriting. "If you find this, Clara, go to Savannah. The truth is buried by the sea." She pressed the note to her heart. That evening, Clara left Fort Benning with nothing but her bag and the secret her husband had died protecting. The station lights flickered as she boarded the southbound train. Outside, the sky bled red over the horizon, as if the earth itself still remembered the war. As the wheels clattered against the rails, she whispered to herself, "They silenced him once. They won't do it again." She didn't yet know that Savannah held the final chapter, and the answer to why 36 brave men were erased from history. The city of Savannah, Georgia, shimmered beneath a storm-heavy sky. Spanish moss hung from the oaks like ghostly curtains, and the salt air carried whispers from the nearby coast. Clara stepped off the train, weary but determined. In her coat pocket, she still held the last note from her husband. The truth is buried by the sea. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But she could feel William's presence in every gust of ocean wind, urging her forward. After asking questions around town, she was directed to the old Fort Jackson, a coastal outpost that had been used briefly by the army during the war for medical research. The locals said strange shipments arrived there at night in 1918, boxes sealed with military codes, and guards who vanished once the armistice was signed. Clara rented a lantern and a horse cart and rode out toward the coast as thunder rolled over the Atlantic. The fort was half buried in sand and ivy, its wooden doors swollen by salt and time. Inside, she found the remnants of an office, maps, broken crates, rusted weapons. Then in the corner, a door marked Restricted Medical Supply. It was locked. She took a breath, struck the lock with a rusted crowbar and forced it open. Behind it was a narrow stone passage leading down toward the shore. The air grew damp. Water dripped from the ceiling. At the end of the tunnel, she found a half-collapsed room, and in it a single steel trunk marked D472. Her heart pounded as she knelt and opened it. Inside were sealed folders, field maps, and a single small box labeled Recovered from REMS Personal Effects W. Emerson. Her trembling hands opened the box. Inside lay her husband's dog tag, his notebook, and a second letter never sent. She unfolded it with tears streaming down her face. Clara, if you're reading this, it means I failed to get home. They made us destroy villages, not German posts but French civilians caught in the crossfire. We were told it was an accident, but it wasn't. I wrote the truth in these reports. That's why they silenced us. The world will never know what happened here unless you tell them. William. The thunder outside cracked like gunfire. Clara dropped to her knees, clutching the paper. She understood now. The silent battalion hadn't just vanished. They'd been erased to protect the image of victory. She gathered the documents, wrapped them in oilcloth, and carried them to the surface as the rain began to pour. The tide crashed violently against the shore. In the distance, lightning lit up the sea like a burning horizon. At dawn, she walked into the Savannah Morning News office, soaking wet, clutching her bundle of evidence. I have a story, she told the editor, and the world deserves to read it. 2 weeks later, headlines spread across America. The silent battalion, the mission the government erased. The scandal shook Washington. Investigations followed. For the first time, widows received the truth about what had happened to their husbands. Clara never remarried. She kept William's letters in a wooden box by her bedside until the day she died, in 1963. When her house was later sold, the new owner found that same box hidden beneath the floorboards, the letters still preserved, still marked with military wax, and one final note written in faded ink: history forgets, love remembers.